In this video we are going to create a scary, brooding atmosphere or ambience that could be very useful for any horror type projects. So we are starting with the default preset in Vital, and I'm actually going to start by just choosing one of the wavetables here, and I really like the ones that I used in the last video, so I'm just going to use them again. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to play it at a very low pitch again. And I'm just going to use LFO1 to modulate the position here so we get some movement. But as usual with atmospheres and ambiences, I typically want the movement to be rather slow. So I'm just going to reduce the tempo here. It's fine, and we can even pitch this down further to something like this. And let's also give it a few voices, just so we get a bit of width and a bit of more movement in there. And then let's choose our second oscillator, and I think I'm just going to use this one here. And again, I'm using an LFO, and I'm just going to use a different one here, so I have the option to give them a bit of a different movement. So let's just change this up a little and reduce the tempo as well. And we can pitch this one down too. And maybe to support all of this, let's just use a sine wave. And this sine wave is going to be really steady, so there is not going to be any movement. And it's also not going to be audible at this low pitch, so we are going to pitch this up a bit. So depending on your headphones or your monitors, you might be able to hear it, but once we push the overall volume up and compress everything together, you will probably be able to hear it a bit better. And you obviously can also just play the entire patch at a higher pitch. But this is going to be our steady drone in the background. And now we can just send everything through filter 1. And I'm also going to give this a bit of filter movement. We're going to cut the highs here, but I want this to move around a bit. I'm just using an LFO3 here and reduce the tempo here as well. Just a slow and steady movement. And now we can already head over to the effects section. And the first effects I'm going to use are some subtle effects that are going to introduce a bit more movement. So the chorus and maybe a flanger and a phaser here. And I'm going to use them at a really low mix setting. Again, these should just be really subtle. Now another important one is going to be the delay. And I'm just going to maybe use a ping pong delay here, and let's delay one side a bit and increase the mix and feedback a bit maybe. So this helps us to wash the sound out before we actually apply the reverb. And again, gives it just a bit more movement, a bit more stuff that's happening. That's going to be really interesting once it actually hits the reverb. We can also compress all of this, and you can try to place the compressor at different positions in your effects chain. This can change the sound drastically, so just play around with this. For this, it's going to be okay at this position. Let's add another filter. This is just to control how much of the highs we want to actually let through. Again, this is supposed to be a scary dark ambience, so we might not want to have too much high-end information there. But let's just leave it like that, and we can come back to this later if we want to reduce or increase the highs. And now, of course, one of the most important parts of this chain is going to be the reverb here. Fairly high mix and quite a bit of length for this, and size as well. And let's just reduce the highs here. So now with all this movement happening, we get a really interesting atmosphere, I think. Some parts of it even sound like there are some voices in the background, and we can process this a bit further and just maybe add an EQ and a compressor, utility and a limiter. The utility I'm just going to be using to just set the lower frequencies to mono here, and then we're going to use the compressor to catch a few of the peaks. As you can see, the sound is very low-end heavy. There's a lot of low-end build-up in there. So depending on which kind of context you want to use this, you might want to clean up the lows a bit. I'm just going to do something like this just to reduce this build-up here a bit. And then we can also push it into the limiter a bit. If you want to experiment with this a bit further, you can also use something like white noise or any type of noise that you like. So we could use LFO4 here and just use a shape like this. So at the beginning, we get this short white noise hit that's gonna go through all the effects, obviously, the delay and the reverb, and this is gonna create something interesting as well. I just don't want this to be too audible, so I'm actually going to change this to a more organic sounding noise and also reduce the volume here quite a bit. Yeah, just really subtle, so you don't even realize it's there. But with the delay and the reverb, it just adds a bit of more movement there. And of course, we can also use 1LFO to introduce some pitch modulation, but very subtle again. And let's just use a random shape like this. Again, very slow, and just so we get a bit of pitch movement in this entire sound. And now we can also try playing this at a higher pitch. So now obviously the higher you play it, the more audible this sine wave is going to become. And you might want to reduce the pitch of this in relation to the pitch of these other oscillators here. Depends what kind of sound you want. If you want this to be really audible, if you want the sound to have a rather high-pitched drone in there, like this. Because now the sine wave also makes the pitch modulation that we have here very audible. So I hope this helps and inspires you to create scary, eerie ambiences like this yourself.